Hello everyone, my name is Hubert and welcome to Teach Me channel. Today we have a really exciting video ahead of us because today we will be talking about A-level eukaryotic cells. I will explain everything about the basics of how eukaryotic cells work. I will explain both animal cells and I will explain both plant cells. And so this is an important topic because this forms a basis for a lot of stuff that we'll be doing in the future. And it's a really cool topic. I got some really cool pictures ahead of us. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay. So what are eukaryotes? Eukaryotes are organisms that have eukaryotic cells. Now, eukaryotic cells are a special type of a cell that is quite complex, and they tend to be a bit larger as opposed to prokaryotes. We'll be covering prokaryotes in another video, but eukaryotes are a bit more complex than prokaryotes and they are a bit larger. Now, okay, so let's have a look at examples of eukaryotes. Animals are eukaryotes, plants are eukaryotes, algae are eukaryotes, and fungi are also eukaryotes. Today we'll be focusing mostly on these two guys, but I will mention a couple things here and there about algae and fungi. Okay, now bacteria are an example of prokaryotes. So bacteria are not on this list, but all these guys here are eukaryotic cells. Okay. Now, cells, especially in animals and plants, cells are often specialized to perform tasks. They are specialized to perform specific tasks. And their structure may differ slightly to what I am going to show you later, because their structure is designed to help them carry out their function. So it may be slightly different, or they may have a relatively different amounts of certain cell organelles. I will explain this a bit more. So cilia, for example, are the cells in the lining of our throat, in trachea. In trachea, where you breathe in air, and their job is to move mucus out of the lungs. They have these little hair that help them move mucus out of the lungs. Now, in order to be able to do that, they need quite a lot of energy. So they have more mitochondria. So this is an example of how cell can be specialized for its function. Now, intestinal epithelial cells have these little microvilli. They're called villi, these little outgrowths like this, where it gives them a greater surface area to help them absorb more food, more nutrients in the intestine. Now, neurons are, of course, the brain cells, and another example are goblet cells in a stomach, whose job is to produce mucus to protect the stomach lining. Now, the cells organize themselves in this specific system. So, first we get cells, such as epithelial cells. Epithelial cells, for example, if you lick the inside of your cheek, you can feel the epithelial cells. Now, tissues, so these cells come together to form a tissue which performs a specific task. So these cells can come together to form an epithelial tissue that usually forms a barrier. Now, these multiple tissues come together. Each of these tissues performs a task or a function, and these tissues come together to form organs, which have a specific job that requires multiple tissues to do it. So, for example, stomach needs to digest our food. So, stomach has multiple tissues. One of them is epithelial tissue, but also stomach has a glandular tissue to secrete various enzymes such as pepsin, and to secrete mucus to protect itself. Epithelial tissue to form a barrier and to sort of give the stomach that whole, shape. And it also had muscular tissue to contract and to mash up that food in the stomach. So now we have an organ called stomach, and organs come together to make organ systems that altogether have a job, a big overarching job. So stomach is a part of digestive system alongside, pancreas, liver, intestine, and a couple more. So stomach is a part of digestive system which needs to digest food. Now, let's move on. So this is what is the importance of eukaryotic cells and how they come together. Now, let's move on to first cell we're going to be talking about today. Let's move on to animal cells. Okay, here we go. So here we have a beautiful picture of an animal cell. I have labeled it for you, and we will go through, don't worry about it, we will go through what each of these things does. Okay, so we have an animal cell, and we're gonna start with plasma membrane right here. We have a plasma membrane. Now, what does plasma membrane do? Plasma membrane essentially forms a barrier. It gives the cell a border. And why is that important? Well, it is important for two reasons. First of all, plasma membrane can control what goes into the cell and what goes out of the cell. So we can keep things that are outside the cell, and the cell can take in only the things it wants. So plasma membrane has lots of things that help it perform that function. Now, also, another job of plasma membrane is the more obvious one, to basically keep all of that stuff here inside and to give a cell some kind of a structure. Okay, so that's what plasma membrane does. Now let's move on to the big important organelle. These, by the way, things that are inside the cell, we can think of them as organs of a specific cell. So the proper name for them is organelles. I'm going to write this down for you. Organelles. Okay. So let's move on to nucleus. Nucleus is important. Essentially, a lot of people call it a command center of the cell. Nucleus contains our chromosomes, which contain our DNA. So nucleus is important in storing our DNA, which contains genes, which contains all the information that we need to create proteins, to synthesize proteins in the cell. So that is crucial. Nucleus contains our DNA. That's its main job. Now, also, we have Nucleolus inside. That's like a that's like a smaller nucleus within the nucleus. Now, Nucleolus contains the DNA that is required to make ribosomes. Now, if you think about it, this is quite important because ribosomes, as I will go over soon, make proteins. So this Nucleolus will need to make ribosomes in the first place before everything else can be made. So that's why all the DNA required to make ribosomes is contained within Nucleolus as opposed to the rest of the nucleus. Okay. We also have a nuclear envelope. Nuclear envelope is important because nuclear envelope forms a barrier for the nucleus, and it has these little pores. And that allows various proteins to go into nucleus to trigger DNA transcription and stuff like that. However, it also allows messenger RNA. It allows various stuff to come out of nucleus, such as messenger RNA, which needs to travel to ribosomes in order for for translation to occur, in order to make the protein out of a piece of DNA that we have chosen. Okay, so that's what nucleus does. Now let's move on to rough endoplasmic reticulum. In short, is RER. I will repeat it. Rough endoplasmic reticulum. Now, this is important because because the rough endoplasmic reticulum has ribosomes on it. Ribosomes, again, I will tell you, they make proteins. So rough endoplasmic reticulum is called that way because it has ribosomes, so if you look at it through a microscope, it kind of looks rough. And what happens here is that ribosomes make protein, which then they kind of inject inside the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And then RER, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, folds that protein and processes it before it can be finally used. It gives it that shape. You can think of rough endoplasmic reticulum like a set of rollers. For example, imagine a pipe factory. You are given a sheet of metal. Now, what you have to do is you put that sheet of metal into a machine that takes it through like a set of rollers that bend it, then they fold it, then they fuse the metal sheet to actually form like a uniform pipe. So you can think of it that way, like a set of rollers that knocks these proteins into shape. Okay. So that's the role of rough endoplasmic reticulum. It processes our proteins. Now, ribosomes, as I already said, they make our proteins. They take the mRNA, the messenger RNA from Nucleus. By the way, if you don't know these topics, we will be making further videos kind of covering these topics in detail, so don't worry too much. So we can have messenger RNA going from Nucleus to ribosomes, where it contains the information on how to make the protein, and by a process of translation, that protein is made. Okay, so what's next? Let's carry on with smooth endoplasmic reticulum, SER. So here we have rough endoplasmic reticulum, here we have smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum is important for synthesis of lipids, so fats essentially. It is crucial in making lipids and also knocking them into shape. So that's the role of smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Then we have lysosomes. Lysosomes are these sort of vesicles. They are these bubbles. They're these bubbles that contain various harsh chemicals such as reactive oxygen species, and they also contain enzymes that are involved in breaking down a lot of things. So lysosomes are important in breaking down bacteria. If a bacteria gets into the cell, lysosome can catch it, and it can use its harsh chemicals and enzymes to literally rip that bacteria apart. However, lysosomes are also important in recycling, basically digesting old organelles that are no longer needed. For example, this mitochondria is defective, for example, so that lysosome would go over to this mitochondria, and then it would break it down into pieces that then could be used to make something else. Okay, so here we have Golgi Apparatus. Now, Golgi Apparatus is important in further protein folding. It is involved in further protein processing. So first the protein will go to rough endoplasmic reticulum, then it goes to Golgi Apparatus, where it is, again, transformed a bit. And also, Golgi Apparatus makes vesicles. Vesicles are important because they are bubbles. Essentially, they're bubbles that contain proteins or other molecules. You can put all kind of stuff into them, into these so-called bubbles, and then they can go to cell membrane, and then they can go outside of the cell, or they can go somewhere else within the cell. So this is a way of transporting protein and various other molecules. We can this way transport them. Okay. And also Golgi Apparatus, because it makes vesicles, it is involved in making lysosomes, right? Because it makes the vesicle, the bubble that lysosome has all the chemicals in. Okay, so Mitochondrion is the next one up. Mitochondria are, as you probably saw, the countless memes, mitochondria are powerhouse of the cell. Mitochondria are involved in making sure that the cell has enough energy. And how does it do it? It makes ATP, the energy currency of the cell. So mitochondria are very important in making ATP via process of respiration, and that is a whole another topic unto itself, and we will be making a video on that in the future. Now, so mitochondria make energy, long story short. And then we have cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is last but not least, it's basically the sort of liquid that the cell is in. So everything here is submerged in a liquid, which is called cytoplasm. Now, this is important because cytoplasm contains various enzymes, so lots of chemical reactions that are necessary for cell are actually taking place in cytoplasm. Because cytoplasm contains all the enzymes, all the chemicals that we need, everything. So cytoplasm has quite a wide-ranging role. Okay, so this is animal cell. These are the organelles that are involved in animal cell. And now, let's move on to plant cells. Okay, here we go. So here's a beautiful, beautiful picture of a plant cell. And as you can probably see, a lot of things are similar. You know, here we can see Golgi Apparatus, here we can see the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, Nucleus, rough endoplasmic reticulum, Mitochondria. So a lot of things in a plant cell are very similar to animal cell. Now, I marked here the differences. Well, this isn't really different, but I will tell you. So I marked here the different bits, you know, to avoid any confusion. So these are, so if you learn the animal cell, then you just need to learn these bits to sort of understand plant cells and this bit. Okay, so let's start off with cell wall. This is the first difference. It is a thick cell wall made of cellulose. Now in a fungus it will be similar, but in a fungus that cell wall would be made out of chitin. So here we have a cellulose cell wall, and that cell wall keeps the cell rigid and it keeps its shape. If you think about it, plants don't really have a skeleton, so to speak of. We just have a green stem and that's it, but plants don't have as sort of robust skeleton as humans would do, with our bones, which are quite hard, and so on. So cell wall is one way that the plant cells can be kept rigid, but another more important function of cell wall is to allow the cell to cope with large intakes of water, and to allow the cell to sort of cope with losing a lot of water. It keeps the cell shape the same. So if we, via osmosis, because obviously water transport is so important in a plant, if we added a lot of water into the cell via osmosis, which we'll be making video on in the future, that cell, if it didn't have a cell wall, if it was an animal cell, it would burst. Whereas because it has a cell wall, the cell would not burst. So cell wall allows it to cope with big changes in cellular water. Okay, the next bit that we need to talk about is plasmodesma, or plural for it is Plasmodesmata. Now, these are little holes. Here they're actually bigger than they would be in an actual cell compared to everything else. But long story short, these are holes. And these, if you think about it, we would have another plant cell here, we would have another plant cell here. So these allow to transport nutrients and various things through different plant cells, and it allows different plant cells to communicate with each other by sending signals across there in the form of chemical compounds. Okay, so continuing with our plant cell organelles, next one up we have is plasma membrane. Now I know that this isn't really so much of a difference. It is still important to mention that there is a plasma membrane. That, yes, we have a cell wall here, but we also have a plasma membrane in a plant cell that has the same function as an animal cell, to keep inside things inside, to keep outside things outside, and to control the transport of molecules outside and molecules inside across the membrane. Okay, so next one up we have chloroplast. Again, we will be making video on chloroplast. This is important. Chloroplasts are involved in, they are the main organelle involved in photosynthesis. So they make the essentially food for the plant. They make the sugar that can be used, the glucose that can be used in respiration later on by the plant cell. So these guys are green because they're involved in absorbing the sunlight, and then they have these little stacks here, the thylakoid stacks, and which form grana, and they're joined by lamellae, and these actually do the photosynthesis. There is more involved, that's for another day, but okay, so chloroplasts are involved in photosynthesis. Okay, and the final one here we have vacuole. Vacuole is this big sort of empty space that contains cell sap. It contains cell sap, so it can be used for storing various nutrients, but really it's not really used much for that, but it's mostly used for maintaining rigidity of the cell. The cell sap is quite thick, so it also gives it this sort of additional support for this whole structure of a plant cell. And it also sometimes is used to isolate unwanted chemical substances. So if a plant cell finds something toxic or has too much of something, it can sometimes dump it in the vacuole and sort of isolate it from the rest of the cell to keep it safe. Okay, so this is it. This is it for plant cell. Now, fungal cells, as I said, have a chitin instead of cell wall, and algae cells that form algae are very similar. They're glorified plant cells, if you will. They're actually really quite similar. There are some minor differences, but they are similar. Also, another thing to mention about plant cells is that, as you can see, there is no lysosomes. There is no lysosomes in a plant cell. Okay, so this is it for today, guys. Thank you very much for listening and watching. I really appreciate it, guys, every time you listen or watch my videos. And if you want to stay up to date with daily maths, science, and some biomedical science videos, smash that subscribe button below. If you like the video, give it a big old thumbs up. And if you have any questions, shoot me a comment and I will reply to you as soon as possible. And thank you again. See you next time.